Hi. Well, when it comes to the classical period, it's very likely that on your shelves at home, you've got some Mozart sonatas or some Haydn sonatas. You may have other bits of Clementi or I don't know what. Actually, a lot of music that would transfer very well to the organ. It's not using an excessive range of the piano, so you're not likely to get too far out of the extremes of the organ keyboard. Even if you get odd notes that are outside those extremes, you can probably cook them by locating them in a different octave, so that shouldn't be too difficult. There's not a huge reliance on the sustaining pedal, so that will transfer quite nicely. You've often got a lot of phrasing detail that would also transfer to the organ very nicely. So plenty to go out there. And lots of examples I could have chosen for this, but I've just decided to pick on this Mozart sonata in B flat. It's a pretty familiar sonata. Maybe it's one you play, I don't know. But in this first movement, we get indications, piano and forte indications. So it's another piece where you could set yourself up on two different keyboards. So if you're trying to change dynamics, one way of doing it is obviously to add stops or take stops off. But in a sense, that is a little bit of an organist skill that takes time to develop. You know, if you're trying to play and then you're trying to pull out a stop somewhere, if you're not used to doing that, that's quite awkward. Or if you're trying to press one of these thumb pistons or pedal pistons, it could kind of derail you if you're not used to doing it. But if you've got two keyboards, well, isn't that great? You can have two contrasting sounds and think, there we go. Now, really, this B flat sonata in the first movement does require two different kinds of levels, because you notice at the beginning, there's a general indication of piano. When you come to the end of this first page, you get these more robust chords that are marked forte. So again, I'm going to use the registration that we used in that William Byrd piece, but just to show you how you could do this in a piece like this quite effectively. So for the piano passages, using the 8 and 4 foot flutes on the swell organ, and then for the forte passages, using the diapasons 8 and 4 on the grate. Now, there's nothing prescriptive about this. You might think, well, I'm not sure I want the 4 foot flute on the swell, I'll just have the 8 foot flute. Absolutely fine, no problem about that at all. Or you might think, you know, I'd really like that 8 and 2 foot sound without using the 4 foot. You could do that. And again, what works on one organ might not work on another organ. So, you know, that's absolutely fine. You might think, well, I want the fortes to make a real impact, so I'm not going to just use the diapasons 8 and 4. I'm going to have the mixture on top of that as well and make a real kind of splash when it comes to that forte. Absolutely fine. And again, you'll come to one organ where the mixture absolutely shouts and screams at you and you think, no, that's a bit too much, thanks very much. You'll come to another organ where you draw the mixture and you hardly notice it's on because it's quite softly voiced. So, you know, you've got to be ready to adjust to particular circumstances. It may even be that you've got sounds that work to start on the swell and then drop onto the grate, or you might think actually on this particular organ, wherever it is, you might be best doing it the other way around. Start on the grate, move on to the swell, just depending on the stops that might be available. Of course, if you've got more than two keyboards, if say you've got a third keyboard down here, what we normally call the choir organ, well, you could move between the grate and the choir, or between the swell and the choir even. One word of warning on that, if you jump between the swell and the choir, it's just a long way to go. So if you're not used to kind of flicking from one keyboard to another, that's just a sort of added anxiety, isn't it? But anyway, something like this idea of having 8 and 4 foot flutes on the swell, 8 and 4 foot diapasons on the grate, doesn't particularly mean that we've got a massive difference between the piano and the forte in a way that you might be really wanting to achieve on the piano. On the organ, though, is giving us different sounds, 2 flutes, 2 diapasons. So it's a very distinct difference, which serves the job well. And of course, you can deliver the phrasing on the organ as well. see how that sort of approach works quite well. Well, you've got the whole sonata, so you don't only have the first movement. You might get to the Adagio and think, well, maybe I could use this as well. Well, it probably wants something a bit gentler. So how about for this one, we just use the 8-foot stop diapason on the swell. So we've got a single 8-foot flute sound for this. What do you think of this? Sounds lovely, doesn't it? Almost as if it were written for the organ. How about that? Then, of course, you've got a fast movement again to finish. Well, maybe a different kind of sound here. Maybe we go back to the 8 and the 4-foot flutes on the swell, but we add the Mozart to it this time. You may like the mutation stop, or you may think, no, I'd perhaps rather use a 2-foot stop. Absolutely fine. But here's 8-foot stop diapason, 4-foot spitz flute, and the Mozart, that's that mutation stop. So that's one kind of sound. But as I say, if you prefer 8-4-2, or maybe just 8 and 2 on its own. It's another way of doing it. Just depends on what the approach that you want to take is. You know, it's quite a light, kind of light-hearted movement, isn't it? It wants something a little bit kind of sparkly about it. You probably wouldn't just play that on an 8-foot flute. Sounds perfectly nice. It's just a bit kind of underpowered, isn't it? Whereas if you played it on these diapasons on the grate, it'd probably feel a bit heavy. So you see what I'm getting at? It's finding a sound that matches the character of the music. But there we are, 1 Mozart sonata, 3 movements. There's a huge amount of music that just transfers to the organ perfectly well.